own, and that like through the cross promotion, essentially, that they wouldn't interfere with each other either. It's just
and then it plays out organically in game.
Right.
You know, it's the reward happens in the story as well. It isn't just some external thing that happens. Like I'll write an additional stage where you receive that item. It only plays out if you hit that. So it's not just this item just randomly gets thrown at you. I work it into the story. There's a reason why you've been given this extra item.
Yeah. No, it's great. So thank you for sharing more about the whole like gamification side and how it actually really plays into the experience. So, well, I want to shift focus a little bit now and talk about kind of like goals and risks type stuff, because I'm sure in general, like taking on another big project and stuff, and I'm sure a lot of this was done anyways. But it's not necessarily like, as we already identified, like conventional. Like this is kind of an outlier, if you will, because no one has really done something to quite this extent. But I was also curious. I mean, bottom line, yes, some sales are important, but I'm not focused on that. What I'm really curious about, outside of sales, what other goals were set for the comic book?
Just to make a great book. That's the only thing. Even more than sales. That was what I was working on. That's been my entire focus. Sales will take care of themselves. We're going through a real publisher. We've got some people behind. We've got players behind us on Epic Tavern. I've got a little bit of a reader base on my own. So we didn't have to be concerned about sales really. We obviously wanted to do well and all that, but that wasn't our driver. Our driver was just to make something great. And we had the advantage of this being, like I mentioned before, a very low risk experiment. So we didn't have to compromise in the name of trying to sell stuff. We could just create what I thought would be the best experience, because I've been writing Epic Tavern full time for 4 years.
Yeah.
And I have, we have 160 playable heroes in the game, hundreds of quests, thousands of encounters. I mean, we just this mountain of story to pull from. And being able to just dig through that and find all my favorite pieces and all my favorite storylines and my favorite characters, and then just build something new from them. Not a straight adaptation of the game, but a new thing built out of the pieces of the game.
Yep.
And, and in terms of goals, another one just personally, I think Tales from the Fantastical Crimes Unit is begging for an animated adaptation. It's a Monster of the Week format. It has lots of funny characters. You could adapt our first issue basically shot for shot. That didn't happen by accident. And comic properties are being snatched up like crazy right now. Yeah,
I was going to say.
Including a few Black Caravan books that I edit have been snatched up for animated adaptations. So when I was going through all this pile of Epic Tavern storylines and stuff to figure out, what we should adapt, I was always super conscious of what storylines and what structure would also work as a TV series. And an overworked agency tasked with investigating crimes committed by mythological creatures is a solid series pitch. I totally watched that show. And by the flip side, a comic book called Epic Tavern that's set in a tavern and it's about running a tavern, that wouldn't be any good at all. That's not interesting at all. It's a fascinating concept for a game where you're running the fantasy tavern and it engages your imagination and all that. But as a comic, not really. So we needed to find something that really lent itself to the medium. Find which story would be best for this medium, not just how do we shoehorn the story of Epic Tavern into another medium. Yeah. It's about how do we create something that is designed for this medium, exclusively. And I think that's important for writers anyway. And you get some backlash from this from some types of writers who kind of think that, identify themselves as I'm a novelist or I'm a comic book writer. And I look at everything. I don't view any of my stories as belonging to one medium. I always have an eye on adaptations. And Tales from the FCU was the most adaptable to both a comic and a TV series. I mean, it's just show it ready.
What I really like one key thing that I got here, and I'm being mindful of the audience listening from what you just shared here too, is because it sounds like at face value, it may sound like, oh, a comic book, and yeah, it's an adaptation, but it may just, it could be like completely different or whatever, because it's a different format and everything else, as you identified. But the key thing I got here, and this is something that's reoccurring on the show in terms of things that we talk about, is how are you repurposing things? Because basically that's ultimately what you did, but you're repurposing and then adapting in a different way, where now the comic makes sense. And because you said you had all this essentially source material to pull from, which had the framework in place, had a lot of the character, like just basically had everything that it really needed in order to build upon within that format, make it within the comic, which made it probably a lot easier of a process, not to downplay that it probably wasn't a lot of work, but still a lot easier of a process than like starting from scratch, for example, and really pulling from that. And again, but being mindful of not a direct adaptation, because again, that might not be interesting, like going back to the intent and the value aspect of things. And
yes, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's looking at it from the reader's perspective before our perspective. If we lead from our perspective and say, okay, we want to adapt our game, then the way you do that is you make a one-for-one sort of adaptation of it. But is that the best thing for the audience? No.
Right. Yeah. And remember, folks, remember your audience. And on top of that, too, you made a simple, great comment, which was make something great. This is applicable to games, but you're applying it also to the comic, because what's one of the key things that come up in this conversation? Opportunities, right? Well, if you take the effort, and maybe it might be a little bit longer than what you would like to do, it's still important to implement, execute, and everything else. But if you lead with the focus or goal of making something great, you're already looking from a personal goal too. That would be awesome, and there could be that potential of, maybe it could be an animation series or something like that. But by making something great, you're also potentially opening up a lot of other opportunities too. So again, it comes back into to that whole kind of theme that we're seeing here a little bit in terms of opportunities. So really cool stuff there. I want to get into one more thing too, which was just talking about. Actually, I apologize. I'm kind of losing my place, because there's just so many awesome things that we're discussing here that I just I knew there would be a lot coming out of this. I didn't expect it would be to this degree. So it's
excellent. It's always good to hear.
It's just really awesome.
Yeah, I've been neck deep in this for a very long time. So it's interesting to be able to talk about some of it finally.
Oh, cool. Well, I guess one thing, and I know maybe there's anything else that we haven't talked about earlier, then I'd probably like to go into some lessons learned. How important would you say was it that both products enhance the experience for players and readers alike?
We hope that would be the case going in, but it's hard to articulate just how different it feels playing Epic Tavern after having read the comic. It's way beyond anything we had expected going in. It is greater than the sum of its parts by a wide margin. We were very much caught off guard. Our connection to the heroes from the comic is now cranked through the roof. Whenever we're playing the game and controlling those heroes, we get like weirdly overprotective of them and crushed when something horrible happens. And it's not just the characters; it's these environments. Now that we've been able to, because most of Epic Tavern is text. It's a text setup. There's visual components and stuff, but most of the story is just words. And having now seen full illustrations of so many of these environments in the comic, like the Haunted Carnival, the Lost Menagerie, it just totally changes the feel of experiencing those storylines in the game. At the end of the day, Epic Tavern is an imagination engine. That's how we look at it. It's a storytelling engine, and where a lot of the action is text. You're sort of writing the story of your tavern and your ever-changing roster of heroes as you go. So shoveling all this new visual fodder fuel into the imagination engine has cranked it up to levels that we hadn't experienced. So much so that we're now looking for ways to use more of the comic art in the game itself. Initially, the game fed the comic, and now the comic's starting to feed the game. Where we're looking to do pop-ups, because we have all this great artwork of our story world now. So we'll do little pop-ups that show you the location, that you're entering with your heroes. And maybe it's like some little comic book cutscenes with some of the action. And one of the things we're super psyched about is that Steve Marto, the artist from the comic, will be doing hand-drawn portraits for all the characters in Epic Tavern.
Oh, okay.
So those will be displayed on their character sheets and when they're adventuring. And right now we have kind of automatically generated, 3D renders, based on the 3D model of the characters and stuff. And it's kind of bare bones. But having these actual hand-drawn portraits for all 160 playable heroes, it's just going to completely change the feel of them and your connection to those characters and your bond to them. So I mean, it wasn't the products enhancing each other. We really didn't know coming in what to expect. But now that this first issue is done, and we love it like crazy, kind of integrating some of the artwork and visual style of the comic into the game itself is just a super no-brainer. And that wasn't something we expected. It kind of caught us off guard. And again, it's just looking for opportunities. When we saw how much we loved the comic and how much great visuals were in there and how it affected our personal experience of playing the game, we're like, oh, we need to find ways to share that with players. Add that value to them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love it too, because again, it goes back to kind of like, oh, well, we're really digging this right now, and it would be stupid not to repurpose this in the game, right? And now,
exactly.
and they, like you said, they keep feeding into each other, and it's still doing so in a manner that it's not disruptive. It's still seamless to the experience of whatever that medium is.
Yes, and neither has to compromise to do it.
Yeah,
that's the key thing. Yeah.
So yeah, and it's cool too, because like one thing you just shared as well is simply, we had some original ideas about stuff, but we didn't necessarily know exactly how it all play out. But as the projects continued, those things started to surface, and I guess what I want to say is you can't plan for everything. I mean, to an extent, you can have a vision, you can have some framework or plan to work from, but never expect that you have to follow to the T, because if you're doing that, you're not going to see all these other opportunities.
Yeah, and there will always be branches that pop up in the path in the process of making anything. And if you get too locked in on, okay, this is the design, this is the goal, this is what we're doing, these are our benchmarks, and boom, 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 and you get everything too locked in, you're just going to miss out on some great opportunities. Yeah,
definitely. All right. Well, before we close here, I want to shift into some lessons learned. And one thing I'm just curious about, because again, like, I think you were a great asset for the team because you just had so much experience in all these different areas. You've been involved on the project so long and everything else. But I would imagine that there's still challenges that came up. So were there any particular challenges that you faced throughout this project, and what were the ways that you overcame them?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing easy about making comics. I swore after my last series ended that I would never run another series. It was just, I love the people I was working with, but it was just such a terrible experience all around because we didn't know what we were doing, and we made every rookie mistake. It didn't matter how hard we grinded because our model was wrong. So we just ended up running ourselves into the ground for nothing. But then 6 years go by, and in that time I edit maybe 150 comics. And I kind of study the art form and the market, and I've got a much better feel of things now. And suddenly I see this opportunity, with Black Caravan and Scout to bypass all the pitfalls of my last series and do things right this time, and this opportunity shows up as I'm spending every day neck deep in an intellectual property as narratively rich as Epic Tavern. It felt, okay, quick tangent. So this, next reference makes sense. When I was a kid growing up in Maine in the 70s, one of our activities we would do in the early spring was called iceberging. And this is like as the frozen rivers were just starting to thaw out and move again, the water